Sudan's warring generals say they are willing to negotiate at talks in Saudi Arabia. The U.S. says that Russia has suffered huge losses in Ukraine, including 20,000 killed in just 5 months. Fighting appears to have intensified in Sudan's capital, with the sound of gunfire echoing across the city and thick black smoke billowing into the sky. A UN convoy says Sudan's warring generals have reportedly agreed to send representatives for negotiations, potentially in Saudi Arabia. The World Food Programme has lifted a temporary suspension of operations in Sudan as the fighting between rival military groups pushes millions into hunger. Food distribution is expected to begin again, but only in locations where humanitarian access is assured. There are warnings of a major humanitarian crisis in Sudan as people trapped by the fighting run out of food and fresh water. The UN is sending its top aid official to try and coordinate relief efforts. And while thousands of foreign nationals have been evacuated, tens of thousands of Sudanese try to cross any border they can reach. They're fleeing into neighboring countries, including Egypt, Chad, and the Central African Republic. The UN says it's bracing for the possibility of more than 800,000 people seeking safety. These Ukrainian soldiers are on trench-digging detail near Bakhmut. Troops are under almost constant Russian shelling, but the U.S. says Moscow's Bakhmut offensive has stalled and failed. The White House estimates that Russia's military has suffered huge losses in the last 5 months for fighting Ukraine in this region.
But just since December, we estimate that Russia has suffered more than 100,000 casualties, including over 20,000 killed in action, nearly half of whom were Wagner soldiers, the majority of whom were Russian convicts that were thrown into combat in Bakhmut without sufficient combat combat training, combat leadership, or any sense of organizational command and control.
Russian authorities in the region of Bryansk bordering Ukraine are on the hunt for those responsible for blowing up a section of railway track which derailed a Russian freight train. There's no immediate indication who set off the explosive, but Bryansk has suffered sporadic cross-border shelling during what the Kremlin still calls a special military operation in Ukraine. Elsewhere in Russia, people in St. Petersburg have been laying flowers in the monument for Ukrainian writer Taras Shevchenko, in memory of Ukrainians that have been killed by Russian missile strikes since last Friday in the regions of Uman, Kyiv, and Dnipro. A high-profile Palestinian prisoner has died in Israeli custody after more than 80 days on a hunger strike. Kader Adnan, a leader in the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group, had been starving himself since his detention in February. This is the first time a Palestinian has died on hunger strike while in Israeli custody. Shortly after the 45-year-old's death was announced, rockets were fired from Gaza City towards Israel. Islamic Jihad had warned of retaliation if Adnan died. Palestinian groups have also called for a general strike, and protests are likely to follow.
Excellencies, Minister.
Fighting climate change requires a global deadline for phasing out fossil fuels. That was one of the main messages at the Petersberg Climate Dialogue Conference in Berlin. The German Foreign Minister also said net zero targets can only be achieved through solidarity and cooperation between industrialized and developing nations.
Wir haben auf der letzten Klimakonferenz erlebt, dass wir eben nicht genug erreichen konnten mit allen Staaten dieser Welt. Deswegen wollen wir hier in Berlin diejenigen zusammenbringen von Industriestaaten, von kleinen Inselstaaten, von Schwellenländern, die wirklich Hand anlegen wollen, die out of the box denken und Lösungen dafür finden wollen, wie wir dazu kommen, die Klimakrise wirklich einzudämmen.
The event's a key negotiating step ahead of December's COP28 summit. In a video address, the UN Secretary-General said a lot remained to be achieved.
By the end of COP28, I count on all G20 leaders to have committed to ambitious new nationally determined contributions covering all greenhouse gases and the whole economy and indicating absolute emission cuts targets for 2035 and 2040. And I urge all parties to ensure that COP28 delivers on loss and damage funding.
Campaigners are concerned that some countries back the idea of carbon capture and storage as a means of allowing oil and gas extraction to continue or even expand. Governments have committed to keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees, but time's running out. The shopping basket gives it away and Eurostat confirms it. Inflation rose again in the Eurozone in April. According to data announced on Tuesday by the European Union Statistical Office, the annual inflation rate increased by 0.1 of a percentage point compared to March, up to 7%. For yet another month, the lion's share of the price increase was borne by the food sector. Alcohol and tobacco did not help either. The so-called core inflation, which does not take into account energy, food, alcohol and tobacco prices, fell by 0.1 of a percentage point to 5.6%. The Eurostat figures are worse than was predicted by analysts who were betting on stagnation and are a further incentive for the European Central Bank to raise interest rates again at its meeting on Thursday.
Ukraine's top judo competitors have announced they'll boycott the World Championships starting in Qatar next week in protest over the participation of Russian and Belarusian athletes. On Sunday, the International Judo Federation said that they could compete as neutrals and not represent their countries.
Ми готувалися до цього, розуміли, що може така ситуація бути, але чекали, що все ж таки здоровий глузд в Міжнародній федерації переможе, але вийшло не зовсім не так. 28 числа квітня, в останній день реєстрації, буквально там за 7-8 годин до кінця реєстрації, на сайті Міжнародної федерації вийшов такий меседж про те, що IJF допускає спортсменів з Росії і Білорусі до всіх своїх змагань в нейтральному статусі, так звані індивідуальні нейтральні атлети.
The IJF says an independent body will carry out background checks and monitor the athletes' social media accounts. Anyone found to be a supporter of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine will be excluded from the competition.
The countdown to King Charles III's coronation has begun as hardcore fans of the British royal family are already camping out to witness the historic occasion 5 days before the big day. Hundreds of thousands of people from around the world are expected to travel to London to watch Britain's first 21st century coronation live and in colour.
Yeah, this is a big historic event, the coronation. It's something that we as a group have never witnessed before. We've only seen it in black and white on television.
They arrived today and the coronation is on the 6th. Look at that. They're staying here. Thousands of people will come either tomorrow or the day after and they will sleep here until the 6th, most of them, to have the best view. But we expect, I don't know, at least 5 or 6 million people around this area.
The coronation's main public event, the King's procession, will depart Buckingham Palace to reach Westminster Abbey. There, the Archbishop of Canterbury will crown the King and the Queen.
The city of Liverpool, famous for its music, football and friendly people. Known affectionately as Scousers, they can't wait to host Europeans attending the Eurovision Song Contest.
I'd say the city's bouncing, to be honest with you. They're really looking forward to it. You can see everywhere you go, there's like, signs of Eurovision. Everyone's like, pepped up for it and that, so it'll be good.
Liverpool's the home of music. It really is the home from way back when in the 50s, 60s, right up to now.
It's going to bring a lot of money into the city. The hotels business, the pub game, even the taxis, and it's going to be brilliant for the city.
For these two Ukrainian families, Liverpool is now home. Refugees whose country won the Eurovision Song Contest last year.
I think it's quite fair because UK helped Ukraine a lot.
Eurovision enthusiasts have already begun arriving to experience the build-up to what's expected to be the biggest Eurovision takeover a host city has ever staged. as some wait in line for their opportunity to potentially win tickets to the prized event.
It's anticipated that Eurovision will inject £25 million into the economy here on Merseyside, and that beyond that there'll be a 5% increase in terms of the number of European tourists coming to this city every year.
Inside the arena at Liverpool's famous Albert Dock, the set has been designed to the theme of togetherness, celebration and community, with the soundtrack to this year's event written by Ukrainian composer Michael Nekrasov.
We see that the whole city is in a Eurovision mode, totally. All the restaurants, all the bars, are totally living it, and we can't wait to experience more things from the city as the Eurovision unfolds.
It's one of my dreams to be in England, and it's really amazing that we are here in the city of music, in the city of everything happened in the past, and we are going to celebrate the Eurovision Song Contest here in the UK.
A song contest which should be taking place in Ukraine, but Liverpool has stepped in as a substitute, and Scousers plan to do Ukrainians proud. Luke Hanrahan, Euronews, Liverpool.
Celebrities and the heads of fashion have descended on the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York for fashion's biggest night. The theme of this year's Met Gala honored designer Karl Lagerfeld, who spent 5 decades in fashion before he died in 2019. The event, which occurs on the first Monday of every May, raises millions of dollars for the Met's Costume Institute. Each of the 400 or so invited guests must purchase a ticket for $50,000 US. Tables can cost around $300,000.